Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Lunch Tech and Chat. I've got my friend William here as usual. Will, AI is crazy. Everyone's pouring money on AI, funding, getting money, those companies becoming billionaires, millionaires, and some people taking the time to make scams or get free money.
Yeah, it's
And
not for
you know what I'm
everybody.
going to talk about? Builder AI. So let's talk
Yeah.
about that.
So Build AI is being around as being around the news all over the place. So kind of like when you look at the table of the companies that have raised over the last few months and the last couple of years, and also have rebranded themselves and all that kind of stuff, they were probably one of the toppest, most invested companies. And then something happened. What
Yeah.
happened, Andre?
So they had investment, just for people to have an idea. They had a raise of more than 450 million, and they had people like Microsoft, SoftBank, Deepcore, IFC, and lots of companies putting money. And they had an evaluation of 1.5 billion. So it's like the next unicorn.
Yeah, the
But in
startup that was
reality,
just they were just launched 2 years ago.
yeah. So it's a company that was promising that you would write your prompt and they would deliver you a full working software, like lots of companies are doing right now, which is the whole vibe coding. But even going above that, like a deployed software running in the cloud, companies are doing that, like not OpenAI, sorry. Google is doing that, and then we have Vercel, App Builder. That's lots of other companies that are doing that. But the secret sauce of Builder AI is that when you put your prompt in the system, it's not actually AI. It's 700 engineers in India on a 24 by 7 shift, reading the prompts and developing applications. What do you think about that, Will? Like, this is fucking crazy, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that they could pull that off, to be honest, because I mean, kudos for them for still actually
Kudos.
having kudos for them actually for pulling off the fact that actually people were still kind of like doing things, I guess, reasonably fast to be able to bring back the code to the users. But I think the key thing is how was that actually found out? Who found out? Do you know actually the inside story behind
I
it?
don't know. I don't know who find out, but imagine like you put your prompt, right? And then you click send. So a request goes to someone. Sometimes, yeah, probably using OpenAI and like ChatGPT to help coding, or Cursor AI or something like that. So
Yeah.
that person is receiving your prompt, developing the software on the fly, giving it back to you to feel like AI. That's such a big scam. And with an evaluation like that, paying 700 engineers in India, it's actually cheap as to run a
Mm.
company that people are thinking that are AI and is evaluated at 1.5 billion, right?
Yeah. So I think the other thing about the evaluation, that's where I think some of the early signs actually came. So I dug a little bit into the scam, and where it was identified that was actually a scam was actually pretty much by their lenders. So what happened is that they had been reporting an overestimation of revenue relative to what they had. And then I think one of the lenders actually requested for an audited report of those financial statements. And then they found out that they were overestimating their revenue by 300%. And then that lender pulled the plug on them and say, no, I'm not extending your line of credit. And then that's where things actually started unraveling.
And I heard that there was like a story that they faked some sort of deal with another company, and
Yeah.
they own both companies, and one company was buying from the other to feel like a fake transaction of millions what happening. Did you read that as well?
No, I didn't read that part of the report. I only read about the lender side. but I wouldn't be surprised if they were already, you know, essentially lying on the revenue and the sales of their software. It's just a matter of time before they would lie about a deal that was actually happening between them and another company, right? So,
And this is crazy because if they haven't taken that seriously and actually developed a system, maybe they didn't even have the knowledge to do that. But like companies like Cursor, they just had another round of funding of 900 million US
mm,
dollars. Like
yeah.
it's the right time to make money, but it's like you need to be playing the game right, or else someone will find out eventually, right?
I mean, it's not necessarily new, right? We remember, you remember like a couple of years ago when a lot of companies were essentially, when there was the whole kind of like rush to be the next LLM kind of like
Blockchain.
provider, or the next LLM provider, etc. At that point in time, just like 1 or 2 years ago when that was happening, and people were finding out that actually all of those companies that were branded as the essentially kind of like an LLM provider. They were just kind of like, there was all of these memes around kind of like like from Scooby-Doo, kind of like removing the mask, and behind it was just actually OpenAI
OpenAI.
API, you know? So it was similar. So this is not kind of like new in a overhyped market. People kind of like tend to jump into the thing that is the most buzzy. Up back then was actually being an LLM. Now, because the
It's
LLM
like a couple of
stack
years ago, we
is,
had a lot of scams on blockchain, and you are in the sector, so you know about it,
mm,
right? Like lots of
oh yeah, I mean,
fake
it hasn't
companies
stopped.
and scam and tokens and
And that hasn't stopped, right? So it's just that the market is maturing, but it always in the edge of the market where new excitement, to be honest, in part is the fault of the VCs, because VCs, they get in a way a little bit numbed by whoever is actually doing something, and unless there is not all of the buzz around a novel thing rather than actually an optimization or an existing process, if there's not something new that they haven't seen before, they don't pull money. So actually they force actually a lot of those companies to go into scammy buzzwords or things like that, in to an extent. I'm not putting all of the fault on them, but that happens a lot. So the companies actually, they build software not for their users or for the actual use that they want to make, but more as a buzzword towards a VC. And there's a lot of companies that are just like, marketing companies. And even though they seem to be a marketing company for their users, their primary target is their VCs, right? So this is not that surprising, um, because it's an attention economy, and everyone is trying to attract, all of those companies are trying to attract attention at some level on some bus. And of course, they will be the ones that are going to be over the top on the marketing side. And you will be, what is the line between marketing and scam? Sometimes that line is really gray.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that happens.
and on talking about that, like as you're saying, the buzzwords or the stuff that is in hype, that's what the investors wants to see. Different types of scam. And then we take, for example, and for granted as well, but the biggest company in the world, Apple, right? They've been talking about this freaking Apple Intelligence for ages. They made a lot of companies and people go in the hype and buy all those new Apple phones because they were going to be enabled for Apple Intelligence, and all this
Mm,
great AI, amazing stuff was rolling out. And then they delivered very poorly. Everyone started complaining about. I think even Apple scrapped the Apple Intelligence team or something like that. But I feel really disappointed that on the WWDC 25,
mm,
they had all the stage of the world, everyone expecting to hear about AI like the same that Google is doing with Android and all the other companies, Microsoft and etc. So there was this big hype and big expectation, and they didn't even talk much about AI. It was
Hmm.
all about the new visual, liquid glass, all transparent. The icons are gonna change. It's the biggest change on UI. It's like, is that what people actually want? Like, do you feel like, I don't know, like my sense of feeling is that people are gonna start migrating to Android because the AI on Android is so amazing and Apple's just the same. Do you feel the
Yeah,
same?
I don't know.
Or
I don't know. I mean, they have like a core user base, right? That is actually quite strong. I mean, because they are not only you know phone users, they are users of all of the Apple set of hardwares and all that kind of stuff. I don't know about you, but I'm talking from a MacBook.
yeah, I'm on a
As we
Mac as well.
as we speak, I have like an iPhone, all that kind of stuff. So I think kind of like a lot of people, for convenience, they do that, and they will use the AIs that they have available through applications rather than actually embedded
Yeah, but let me
into
give
the
you an
hardware.
example, right? Let's say you take your Android, so all that stuff that Google has been talking about. So you take your Android, you have an assistant that is like Java's, like you say, "Oh, I'm fixing my bike. Can you find a video on YouTube that explains how to do this?" And then your phone is just being controlled, is looking for the thing, and then you say, "Oh, add this to my calendar, add this to my notes. What is my next meeting? Can you reshuffle my calendar?" And then you see someone having that experience and someone having the crappy Siri that didn't get updated for I don't know how long.
Yeah.
How long can Apple hold that? I think that's my question. Like, will they be able to keep pulling that out as the biggest company in the world, or will they start losing a part of the share market if they don't get together with their shit? I think that's
Uh,
my question.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure if actually is it because I'm getting too old. There's also some of that. But a lot of like the applications that are being used by like on the AI side are mostly applications. So the like people are okay using I think applications for this for calendar and application for that instead of like a fully kind of like embedded application at as close to the hardware layer as possible, which then gives all of the power to a
Yeah,
single
which is what Android's doing.
AI to do everything, right? Like what Android is doing. Um, I think it will take probably some time for realization that that's something that people really want. And I don't know if we are there yet, to be honest. Like
Yeah.
because because people are using AIs for all sorts of things, but I think to this point, I still think it's mostly for work type of activities and some gaming and other things, but not in gaming and leisure. But I don't see so frequently kind of like people using AIs for things that are in the outside world, right?
Yeah.
For
Maybe
example, like
because I'm
the
in
example of
AI,
fixing
but
a
I
bike, it's
maybe because
possibly that there's a
I
bias there, but there's a bias there, right?
yeah,
The
maybe
echo chamber
because I'm
bias
working AI, but I'm still starting to feel the FOMO of, is that the time for me to move from Apple to Android?
to
Like,
Android,
I
to
keep
Android.
considering that in my mind.
Yeah, but I think everything. I guess you can almost reverse engineer um to edge. Do you actually get an actual edge by doing something like that? Like, is it like convenience or is it like the FOMO? Is it because you see around yourself? And you have to know, in my view, is what is it that you consider to be your edge? Most of my time when I think about edge, I consider edge professionally. I don't necessarily consider edge as I'm a robot and I'm walking around like a robot in my daily life kind of thing. So I think depends on what is it that you see as
Yeah.
your edge. And I don't see me having a phone, which actually, to be honest, I'm trying to reduce the time that I spend on it as being the an edge for my professional life personally. But
Well,
that's me. That's me.
so things that I have in my mind, like imagine, for example, you put your headphones on, it's connected to your phone, you're on the way to work, right? And then instead of taking the screen and actually using the screen on your phone, you're like, okay, prepare me for the meetings that I'm having today.
Absolutely.
Okay, can you move some of those meetings that I have around lunchtime? I need to catch up with Scott. Can you find some time in his calendar? Like stuff like that.
No, that's convenience. That's absolutely. I mean,
That's
yeah.
convenience, and that's
Mm,
what I want.
yeah. 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 No,
I
that
see as a reality, and I don't have it. That's why I'm feeling the FOMO.
yeah, no. I think if you're putting those in those words, that probably there is definitely a way, kind of like, because I'm seeing the kind of stuff that you're saying as like applications, right? Applications where you say, look at all of my data and then reshuffle, I guess, time blocks in my calendar, like relative to time that actually required actually to do certain activities, etc., 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 and then optimize the way that you put kind of like meetings, like based on things like more like cognitive things, like deep work activities. How long does it take for a brain to sync from a alpha to a beta wave, so that actually I can get deep into an activity without being distracted, right? And the AI doing that, I think this is amazing if it can do it,
Yeah,
because all of that kind of like problems that we all are suffering of attention span, I can definitely speak for myself. I do suffer from that kind of stuff from time to time. It's kind of like where kind of like that those deep work, meaningful tasks that you actually kind of like that you cannot get distracted by a notification, a buzz on your WhatsApp, Telegram, LinkedIn, whatever, right? That you have to switch from a highly focused activity that it requires, that then takes another 15 minutes for a brain to resync back into something, so that you can get access to that B wave, right? I think this, if you can train the AI to, I guess, act like in that sense for the human and not for to be another attention grabbing tool, I agree with you 100%. This is valuable. Um, because I mean the AI will evolve, but surprise, surprise, our brains haven't. Our brains is still the primate of 2,000 years ago, and the biology of our brains is unlikely to evolve unless we do something surgically that will upgrade them um, over the foreseeable future. So we only have this, and this biology doesn't change, right? So we gotta make the AI at the moment, at least that's my thinking, work for us rather than us switching from attention span being disrupted social media by attention span being disrupted by AI, because
yeah.
our brains haven't evolved at all,
And
right?
I think it's and just talking about that, like I think it's quite a interesting topic if we think about the human brain and the human evolving as a human, because there's no more natural selection on humans. I don't know if we're
It's
actually gonna evolve unless we evolving changing our own genes and making our own evolution naturally. I don't know if
mm,
the humans are gonna evolve any further.
I mean, we evolve, right? Like we have evolved over,
Yeah,
say,
but I mean,
a
right
million.
now, there's no more natural selection. So we either evolve by us evolving ourselves, because I don't know if natural selection will evolve us anymore because there's no natural selection on humans. You know what I mean?
I mean, the time scale of evolution is different, right? Because when we talk about ourselves, like, it's not the time scale of evolution of my life, your life, anybody's life, right?
No, no, no,
We
no.
have,
I know.
but we evolve kind of like our brains have grown, all that kind of stuff. We had shocks, I guess, over, you
I
know,
think what I'm trying to say is the Darwin evolution concept is you have a mutation, and that mutation in some sort of situation will deal with the environment better than the other mutations, and that will become the main mutation. And as the others die, that main mutation is the one that takes to the next step.
100%.
What I
Yeah.
mean is, us as human, as we try to preserve humans in general, we are sort of delaying the natural selection because we're not being selected anymore. We trying to live as long as we can. So I feel like if natural selection is not applying as much, if we don't evolve ourselves by us applying evolution to us, is the human going to actually evolve?
I think it will. It has, right? It's just that the time scale of that evolution is gonna be much more linear the way that it has been, right? And it has been linear. It has been based on shocks like, ice ages and things like that that actually have had actually to change us. Like our biology has had to change, all those kind of like external factors as well. Our relationship, for example, the last big loop that we had is our relationship with the Neanderthals and all that kind of stuff. That has changed us, right? We don't know yet whether we killed the Neanderthals as our species or we bred with them. It's not fully clear. That was our last leap. That leap is you know, 35 plus thousand years ago already. Um, Other than that, we're pretty much the same brain. We've just kind of like added tools and technologies, but biologically, we're still the same as the first guys that actually did the cave painting. 35. I mean, here in Australia, 50,000 years ago. Um, so um, so I think that kind of like if we want, and I think that's probably going to be hard, but if we want to evolve, I think biologically, um, I I think to your point, we will have to force some sort of evolution. If we want to evolve at the scale that the tools and technologies that we build around us are evolving now, given that we're in the first time in our existing that we've creating a tool and a technology that is potentially and very likely gonna outsmart the sum of all of us.
Well,
Um,
it's really outsmarting most
I
of
mean,
us.
it's outsmarting us individually, but is the thing is one AI will outsmart the collective of all of us. I mean, see the ex-CEO of Alphabet, Eric Schmidt, he thinks that we are not that far off. He thinks that what's happening now with the AI revolution is probably in the hype from his perspective, from things that actually he's also been investing into. Um, and he thinks that actually, it's going to be outsmarting us within the next 5 to 10 years, the collective sum of all of us. But how is it that we're going to evolve from there? I think
That's the
um,
question. That's the $1
that's
million
the
question.
question. What is it that we're going to do? We're just going to go and kind of tell everybody, um, okay, it's survival of the fittest. None of us is fit for it. Um, None of us is prepared for that survival of the fittest. Or are we going to say, have some sort of like, I don't know, social pact between all of us that we got to defend our species, against this species that we don't know how it's going to evolve.
Yeah.
And,
It depends
and
how it evolves, right?
what are the,
Like maybe it evolves to serve us and not for us to be servants. Like meaning, maybe the future will be AI is doing all the job and human needs to work less. But as long as we can still divide money and keeps our brain fit, it's not actually a bad thing having more life and less work.
Um, I don't know. I think humans are still driven by a purpose, right? So I think and we are not prepared for it. And
No, we're
there's
not prepared
nothing,
for
and there's not like the vast majority of individuals, I think, around the planet actually define themselves by the work that they do. Um, so we're definitely not prepared for what is it that new world I think is going to become. Um, but but I think we're also having, if I use kind of like science fiction, I love using science fictions for some of this kind of stuff because we don't have any other framework for thinking about a species that is smarter than us. We never had. You cannot look back into history, into the Greeks and etc. when they were having their own kind of like struggles. We have to look through imagination and science fiction. I
well,
would
we
say,
we had we had when sort of Europeans were invading other territories and they
yeah,
outsmarted the people of that location, right? Like that's the closest we had.
yeah, but we usually had from like that would be the equivalent of the tail of the AI relative to us. But it was the tail of the folk that were outsmarted by the invader. We don't know because that was burned or
Yeah.
never
The
existed.
yeah, they were
Right.
slaving those people or killing them to take it
E-
over what they wanted, right?
Exactly. So the AI might be able to tell us
Yeah.
what is it that was to
Based
enslave
on history,
humans.
that's what would happen.
Yeah.
Hopefully, that's not what's gonna happen.
Yeah, yeah. But let's. I think kind of like if I look at kind of like science fiction as a proxy for even like thinking about the problem, like through the many great books that Asimov has done, and he's done a lot of stuff in, that was about robotics and AI and the evolution of human species over, thousands and thousands of years into the future. The one thing that actually that he did, like that all humans as a collective actually they decided to do after testing out all of the AIs was actually they decided actually to put some very strict rules, and they decided collectively that they, like we're saying, like that they were AIs were there to serve humans, that they were there to prevent humans from harm, and and all of those rules were very clearly stipulated and agreed up by the collective of humans. We're not even talking about that stuff.
Now,
Um,
get China and US to agree on anything.
they, like, yeah, these whole weaponization of uses of AI and all that kind of stuff. It just, it will take, I think, some big enormous fuck up from someone, kind of, like I don't know, an Israel kind of like autonomous kind of weapon to go and launch some rockets, like a
Start
nuclear
killing people.
warhead in Iran, like this morning, right? Like sending some sort of like nuclear warhead across Iran and starting some
Yeah,
big
some
fuck
shit
up
will
like
have
that.
to happen before people
It
start.
will happen. It will happen because people are trusting these systems, right? To autonomously kind of act. So yeah. Anyways,
Hopefully we're wrong and we have a
hopefully, I'm
fighting a
hoping.
chance and we're gonna be like Greece in the past that people had so much time to have so many hobbies that everyone was happy. Maybe that's how it's gonna happen. Let's see. Um,
Yeah, hopefully.
talking
I'm
about
hoping. I'm hoping we're absolutely wrong about this.
and talking about that, Will, how you seeing the US at the moment? Like it feels like, and this is the feeling that we get from being outside of the US, right? But it feels like things are so fucked up at the moment that even tourists don't want to go to the US anymore. Like planes are empty because people are having fear of getting their visas declined and shit like that. And you hear stories of families going to Disneyland and getting deported. Like it's so crazy how things are going right now. The things in LA, like deploying the what they call the SEALs, the Navy SEALs to
Yeah, the Marines. Yeah.
it's like yeah, how you seeing all that stuff? Like it feels like, do you feel after Trump US will recover sort of the status that it had in the world? Or do you think that this is a no going back and the world is going to be different from now on? Because you see, like, Germany now investing on military, and like Japan investing on military technology. All those countries that since after the Second World War have been so pacific and dependent, and not thinking about war and thinking about peace. Like the world is trembling. And how you seen that?
Yeah, I think to be honest, it's it's a pretty complex topic, right? And I don't think I can just take kind of like a pure size kind of like answer to that kind of like topic. But I've been
It's like,
reading a lot.
what's gonna destroy the world first? Climate change, AI, or a third world war, or all this crazy shit that is happening?
To be honest, it might be a combination of all of those things. And I don't want to sound dramatic, but I think if you don't look back into history as some sort of way to guide yourself, I think you're lacking a immense framework to understand what's going on at the moment. And I've been reading a lot of reading and listening to podcasts from a lot of people that actually I really respect, that that um have spent actually their hours understanding history and what is it that actually we're kind of like facing. But I mean, it never repeats itself exactly, right? We're not talking about 1930s Mussolini and 1930s Hitler or anything like that, but there are certain patterns, there's certain kind of like directions and certain actions that are taken over time that do make you think about the 1930s a lot. There's always been a big topic of discussion in our households. I mean, my wife is German. Her grandparents actually lived in Germany around that period of time. And I mean, history is probably one of my favorite topics, anyways. And what's happening right now in the US, and it's a combination of things, right? It's a country that is going through a moment of challenge where it's having too much, I guess, debt that it's issuing. So there is a money part of it. There is a military part, a military challenge of it, which is kind of like there is a feeling that it's kind of like propping up its strength. I don't know if you have that same feeling, but like there hasn't been, I think maybe in my lifetime at least, a moment where we've talked so much about the strength of the US. Well, it felt that they're so weak.
Mm, hmm.
You know,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
there's always been, the policemen around, since the Bush times and Clinton and
But
Obama and all that kind of
everyone
stuff. But
always relied on US in some shape or form, or maybe the Western world of saying, yeah, the police, the chief, they will put their finger and save things. But
they,
now it's like, can
yeah,
the US
and
really help?
and the others are challenging actually that aspect. Like when you look even at the recent, tariff trade war, the one that actually folded first was the US. It was not
Yeah,
China.
yeah. Oh
China
hell yeah.
China didn't change. China didn't change its position once actually the escalation started. The ones that folded was the US. So uh, putting God into Ukraine because they said, well, policeman is not around.
Yeah,
Policeman is a
nobody's
big
gonna
talker,
touch
but
you.
actually he's not doing the enforcement, right? So there's all of these little challenges that actually are coming. So you have the debt thing that is happening. You have the challenger things, which before you have the hegemonic power of the US, at least pretty much since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And you have now the challenges in pockets of challenges actually coming all over the place. And then you have the internal thing. The guys are taking on each other's throats.
Mhm.
internally, it feels like a bit of a civil
Oh
war
yeah,
when
if
you.
you see like all the Elon Musk and Trump feels like a soap opera, right?
It feels like I guess, a late stage capitalism kind of like
Mm.
coming to. I'm not saying it to its end because things will solve, but there's a whole set of things, whole set of circumstances, external and internal, that are really, really kind of like making feel like the 1930s. Because after that, um, I guess, the market crash that happened in 1929. Actually, if you go and you look back into Italy and Germany, it was a very, very turbulent time. There was a lot of violence happening. There was people, and then at some point, people told someone, "We can't with anymore. We're we're feeling poor. We're feeling poor. Um, Kids are not getting educated. Inflation is going through the roof." That's what was happening in that point in time. Inflation was going through the roof. People were literally burning kind of banknotes to warm their houses. That was so bad. The Weimar Republic, it kind of like was happening, right? And then, and then on top of it, the people are like, we can't with all of this mass that is going on. We need to have someone that takes control and puts law and order. Doesn't that sound very familiar to the situation right now?
It does.
And
It
then
does.
someone actually takes on that that power, kind of like say, I will solve all of your problems. And then, but except that that person goes a little bit beyond than solving the problems. You start
Except they
saying,
have their own agendas.
have their own agendas. You start saying like your problem. It's always easier to say your problem is because of that enemy, that
Mhm.
internal enemy. What's
Well,
happening right
it's
now with,
diversion, right? Like you
you
need
know,
to find someone to blame your problem, so your problem is not yours. So if and it's all about the narrative, right? Like even if you think about the tariffs, like it was created by Trump. Like he created it. Nobody fault. Like he can't just go back and blame Biden or China or anyone else. Like nobody talked about tariff. It's like you came with that chart and started it. Like, yeah, I get it. Even like when they just passed the law, like to go over um the debt in the US. I think something like they want to go over like 4 times the existing debt. How do you do that? How do you maintain a country with so much debt? Like the whole narrative was we need to save money, we need to cut, we need to get back on our finances. And now you're just saying, oh, let's just blow up our debt. Like, fuck it. Like, it's crazy, man. I fully don't get it. You might have an idea of what the plan is, if there is a plan, but in my mind, nothing makes sense. And I've stopped to think about it. And yeah, nothing makes sense.
yeah, I think a lot of people kind of just, I mean, that, there's always been that on the debt issuance, the deficits and all that kind of stuff. There's always been every single um,
Yeah, but
budget.
Dodge and all the narrative was
Hmm.
let's lower our debt, let's get as a rich country again. And
Let's
where
just
has
try to get some government efficiency. Let's reduce
yeah,
the size
where has
of
that whole narrative
spending.
gone? Like why?
But the thing, I think the problem that actually came also like through Doge is that they were, for you to balance the book, you have the two sides, right? You always have to balance the books from the two sides. So the the whole thing was about, let's balance the book from the spending side, but you can't do only on the spending side. You have to balance the book as well on the revenue side. So you so that actually then you, because what is a bond, right? When a government actually issues a bond, what is it? It essentially issues a bond to cover the shortfall of the tax revenue that hasn't been able to cover for financing all of the public services activities, right? So you are creating that instrument to cover just the part that is the shortfall, the deficit of it,
Hmm.
right? So you have to work at least on a combination of both reducing the amount of spending, but increasing the collection of revenue to some sort of activity, progressive taxation, whatever it is, right? there's more than, there's the whole old saying of Warren Buffett that he pays less tax than his secretary across the US. The vast majority of actually big corporations actually pay way less tax than the average personal income, because they can actually pay all of their tax. Accountants actually to
And
do all the
you
accounting
can't touch those
creativity, right?
people because they are the
You can
money in
never.
the US, right?
Exactly. So it's all of that thing. So it's at what point in time do you also break all of your
Cycle.
companies? And you have to be very courageous. Like, at what point in time does a government go and say to an OpenAI, to a Google, to a Microsoft, I gotta break you because you're becoming too big, and you becoming too big is a threat to me charging you for what is it that you earn? They don't want to do that. It's very challenging for someone that is actually in power, because
It's
at the
not
same time,
actually
these are
breaking.
the
It's just
national
saying,
champions.
okay, you don't pay enough, and if you want to stay in this country, you need to pay more.
But by that time that they are big, they can do all of the creative accounting
Yes.
globally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they almost are forced to break them through, I have to split you.
Which
So
is
actually
what
you're
they
not
do
too
in
big.
Europe, right?
Which is a lot of what the Europeans do, yeah. Yeah.
That's a
It
great
was,
conversation. I love that. I love those conversations, Will. Um,
yeah.
so for the people that have heard us all the way to the end, leave in the comments what you enjoyed from this conversation, what you would like us to talk about next time, if you have any updates on AI or anything that you've seen happening. And what words, Will, do you think they can put in the comments to prove that they've been all the way to the end?
Attention spam.
Attention spam. So that's it. So thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Will, and I'll see you next week.